I think this will be my 4th year, and it must not be too bad because Hugh and James keep asking me to come back again. So I'll see if I can't earn my 5th year today. What I want to do is walk you through kind of 3 general sets of information. I always like to share kind of our vision and worldview, like how we see the world evolving and what we think the impact on business and the opportunities are because of that. I want to walk you through a whole section of, hey, we have a lot of customers up and using the service today now. What are they doing? Like, what are the business benefits and what are they using it for? And then finally, at the end, I think the slide that everybody seems to always like the most is just what's coming in the next 6 months. What's the new stuff? So we'll close with that. But if you have questions along the way, just like raise your hand, jump up, say something. I'd rather spend time making sure we're talking about the things you're interested in rather than the things that are on my slides. Right? So feel free to jump in whenever. I've been using this slide for years now, but I think we're finally, this is the year I think where most businesses are finally seeing this become a reality. And I'll share some data with you later about how we know this is becoming a reality. But this world of the cloud and devices and the kind of the new work style that enables where employees can be anywhere. I think of this as the typical is, some employee is sitting in Starbucks with their iPad trying to get work done, right? And work these days includes a set of things on premise and some things in the cloud, right, that they need to be able to get access to, and it includes probably collaborating with customers and maybe connecting with some partners. Like, that's kind of the nature of modern work, right? And how do you enable that to happen in this world? I mean, there's just so much opportunity for companies to get, to do work new ways and become more productive. And the first set of data I've seen on this, I thought this was awesome. Forbes magazine about a month and a half ago published an article with the first set of research here for a small set of companies that had gone basically all in on kind of this new modern work style. And they had found that they had a 23% increase in productivity, but maybe even more interesting, 100% higher employee satisfaction as a result of kind of going to this work style of, look, you can work anywhere and get things done on the devices you love using the set of services you need, whether those are in the cloud or on premise. And I think that's a pretty compelling business benefit. And I suspect we'll see more and more of this. In fact, we know we're seeing lots and lots of this. The number one client now used with Azure AD and Office 365 is an iOS device. Like, that's the number one thing that's pinging away check and mail in the cloud for Office 365. And we know that most of those are not managed devices. They are not on people's corporate networks. It's just enabling a very, very different work style. But for those of us in this business, right, you got this ongoing question you always have to ask, which is, okay, that sounds great. But what about auditing and security and compliance and all those things that keep the board of directors happy and the CEO from getting fired? Right? Like, what do you do about those in this world of the cloud? Because unfortunately, most of us live in this current mess, right? Maybe you've got some, in fact, you probably do. You have some well-managed on-premise servers, and you've got some devices that you're managing and a good identity system between them. But there's an awful lot of work happening in this blue middle section where people are just picking up things. Right? And today those things might be an iPad or an Android device or some cool new Surface Book Pro that someone bought, right? And they're getting work done in the cloud. In fact, we have a service in Azure AD called Cloud App Discovery. And what it does is you just run it on a desktop and it shows you for all of your managed desktops what apps in the cloud are people using. And you would be shocked at the number of different applications people have found to get work done. Particularly when it comes to things like file sharing. It seems like there's just an infinite number of ways to share files over the internet, and they're very popular. But this kind of picture is a nightmare from a compliance and security and auditing point of view, right? You want to enable the work style, but you don't want to enable this mess. And that's why I always talk about identity being the new control plane, right? Like, identity gives you a really great identity service, one that runs well on-premise and connects well to the cloud. Gives you the ability to enable that kind of modern work style and get those productivity gains and flexibility, right, in a way that, the CISO and the CTO and the CEO can sleep at night, and your auditors will be happy, Right? And so what do I mean by that? So identity is the control plane. In the old days, if you thought about state-of-the-art 2001, you had some on-premise servers and maybe some PCs or other devices and an Active Directory, and you wrapped a firewall and a DMZ around this, and man, you were good, right? Like that was the old world, and really that perimeter, that control plane lived in your network. It lived in the DMZ, it lived in your firewall, and that's where you controlled who could get to what, right? That, though, starts to fall apart all of a sudden when the cloud shows up and all of these devices show up. People want to start using their Android tablet to get work done, or they want to go and use something like Dropbox or Salesforce.com. In fact, I really think Salesforce.com is the company that kind of showed the way here, right? Like you could get a sales department up and very productive in Salesforce.com super fast. And then Dropbox is kind of similarly so. So in this early world, what did we do? Well, first, maybe you built like point-to-point integrations between your on-premises control center, right? And a few cloud apps, like a lot of people, one of the first apps people adopted was Concur. Right? And what you used to do with Concur was that once a week you sent them a spreadsheet, and it had all the usernames and of accounts that you wanted to be able to log into on Concur, right? And they charged extra for being able to federate. Right? Like that was a big deal, circa 2009. Right? And then maybe you did the same thing with Salesforce and opened up just like these little point-to-point kind of communications out to a cloud. And hey, you probably, if you had to, you put a VPN on these devices so that they could get in and access some applications on premise, right? And it's not a bad state to be in. It's probably state of the art, 2005, 2006, if you could pull this off, right? People could get some work done. They had to go through kind of the pain of a VPN, and you weren't quite sure if that Android device was rootkitted or not, right? But you kind of lived with this. But it starts to just not make sense as the gravity of cloud and devices starts pulling, right? So now we're in a world where an awful lot of your compute is happening outside of that firewall. And we're in a world where more and more of these devices are essentially internet native, right? And if you think there's a lot of devices today, just wait. There's going to be a lot more devices. In fact, we know now that there are about 4 billion smart devices, meaning a device that's got a general purpose OS on it and can do things, right? In the world today. So there are probably more devices in the world outside of corporate networks than inside of corporate networks now that people are trying to get work done on, right? And so this pattern of using your on-premises as the control plane starts to fall apart pretty quickly, right? Especially when customers and partners are now demanding or expecting to be able to interact with you directly as well, right? And so this whole model in fact, we have a few customers who've tried this with Office 365, right? They've put VPN clients onto iOS and Android devices. They're routing all the traffic from those users onto their corporate network. They're authenticating them on their corporate networks and then sending them back out to the cloud to go access Office 365. That lasts about 60 days, and then they call us and they go, holy cow, what the hell have we done? This is taking down the network, right? Because the thing that I think most people don't realize is that the on-premise network, this is a big mind shift you have to get your head around, right? The on-premise network is nowhere near as reliable anymore as the internet, right? There used to be a day when the internet, wasn't reliable, but it's just not the case anymore, right? The internet is always on. There is always a way to route around any problem and get to the source that you need to on the internet. Your corporate network, I think we all wish our corporate networks were that reliable. And in fact, the key piece that when it breaks down is usually the connection of your corporate network to the internet, right? So far better to just let people get out and get work done with these internet native devices, accessing cloud services in the cloud. So I would claim that it's time for kind of a resort of our enterprise architectures. And if you think about a world of 10 years from now, I think we can all clearly see that every major enterprise will have nodes of compute all over the place, right? You'll have some nodes of compute in Azure, and maybe some in Amazon, and maybe some in Office 365, and some in Salesforce, and some in Concur, and some in Rackspace. And you will certainly have an on-premise node. You know, it'll be a node, but it'll be a thing you used to think of as your on-premise data centers, right? And you want to be able to coordinate across all of these nodes in a way that lets all of your employees, plus your customers and partners, get work done on the devices that they want to get work done on. And I think particularly those of us in the kind of the device management and security space, if we could go back 10 years, you would just never, ever let these devices onto your corporate network, right? There's just no way to know that an Android device isn't rootkitted, right? That's like inviting viruses into your corporation. And I think a lot of people would claim the same for Windows as well. Right, but if we could go back 10 years, I think all of us with perfect hindsight would say, look, let's just always keep those things outside our corporate network, and we'll run our corporate networks like a node, right? We can be super secure and smart about how those work, and then we will just expose the applications to the edge of our network that people need to get work done. That's just a better model in this world, but now you need something to control, like how do you connect all these up? You don't want that point-to-point mess that we showed earlier, because then it gets really hard to know what's happening and who's doing what and am I compliant. So that's why we're building Azure Active Directory, is to be this kind of control plane in the cloud, something that can essentially assert who can talk to who and get access to what in a way that you can drive it with policy and you can audit it, right? And know that when an employee comes to the company, they get the right things. When they leave the company, they don't get the things they're not supposed to anymore, right? And every time they're doing something, you can see it. And that's what motivates us every day when we come in to work on Azure AD. In fact, if you think about our vision, I really think about that as the cloud at the center kind of vision. And as we work on things, even future versions of Windows Server AD and Microsoft Identity Manager, what you'll see is us pushing more and more on this idea as the cloud as the hub, that control plane being the center in the cloud. And then, you know, if you think about Windows Server AD, what's it going to evolve to become? It's going to evolve to become a on-premise, essentially cache of your identity service, right? That can be used to manage your local node, right? So you're going to have a DC, right? And but it's not going to be like you think of a DC today. It's just going to be a thing you stand up. It'll instantiate a whole bunch of identity data from the cloud, and you'll be able to run servers against it, right? Same thing with MIM. Like, you know, when we think about Microsoft Identity Manager, what's it going to become? It's just going to become an on-premise set of headless servers and agents that from the cloud we can control and use to, you know, do the identity management things you need on-premise to on-premise services. Right? And so that's our whole worldview is in this world of using that Azure AD in the center as the cloud to then drive out and manage across all of these hubs. One of those hubs, your on-premise one, we happen to have a lot of additional software to help you with. Right? And this is what I think of as the key to enabling that modern work style and getting those productivity gains in a way that the board of directors can sleep every night and your CEO doesn't get fired. Now, when we started out to do that, we knew we had to do a few things really differently than we've done in the past, right? The first is that the cloud is inherently heterogeneous, and we knew that it was not going to be, unfortunately, as much as I wish it is not a Microsoft devices world, right? It is a world of lots of different devices doing lots of different things, and if anything, we're kind of seeing this asymptotic function where devices are proliferating everywhere. So the first thing we had to do differently was make sure that all of the ways you interact with the directory in the cloud are open standards based. Right? We are very, very heavily engaged. In fact, in most cases, we're the leading funder and driver of most of these standards now. So if you look at, we are betting the whole company on OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect. If you look at all of the latest Office clients, the ones on the desktop, the ones on in the iOS store, in the Google Play Store, all of those use OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect as their authentication protocols. Right? We've added really nice support in, and we continue to expand our support for SAML. We maintain WS-Fed, but let's be honest, no one's using WS-Fed anymore. That is just so that the old world can work with the new world. Right? All of the ways that you access information in the directory are all REST-based. So if you want to look me up in the directory, I mean, obviously you have to have appropriate permissions given to you by OAuth, right? But if you want to look me up in the directory, you're just going to get back some JSON. And it's all going to be OData4 compliant, right? And like, frick, every major platform in the world now knows how to take a JSON stream and work with it. Right? We've just turned on, like, about 6 months ago, our skim endpoint. So now you can use Azure AD to do outbound skim to any skim compliant endpoint. Unfortunately, there aren't very many. I think there's only like 4 major apps in the world today that support skim. But we're pushing hard to get more of those. But we have also given you a great set of sample code on a bunch of different platforms. So if you want to skim enable your own app, right, or put a skim facade in front of an existing app, we've got all of the code, and it's all open source. It's all on GitHub. So you can get in and skim enable an app for provisioning. I know OCG has used this a bunch of times, right, James? This opens up quite an interesting world, I think, if you think about one where you can provision to any endpoint, put a skim facade in front of it. Is Azure AD skim enabled? Inbound? No, not yet. We're still working on it. Yeah. But you can use the graph. So all of the capabilities you would get in skim inbound, you can use the graph for, and then you'll see us add skim too. And then the last one, in fact, probably my favorite is the FIDO Alliance. So, because especially over the last 2 weeks, who's been following the news the last 2 weeks about all the scary password leaks? So, yeah, it's been frightening, right? So, 2 weeks ago, 272 million new usernames and passwords were available on the Russian black market. We got a hold of that. We have a whole bunch of government agencies and universities and third parties who we work with to get that kind of information in. We got a hold of that and ran it against all of the hashes in our services, and it wasn't a bad list. We got about a 0.5% hit rate on it, so we could protect all of those accounts. And the same thing then happened last week with a new LinkedIn list, a new list of leaked LinkedIn usernames and passwords. Hard to say, leaked as well. We do the same thing there too. But so we've built a great system to help protect you against those leaked usernames and passwords. But that's kind of a band-aid, right? Like FIDO, I think, is a much better answer, which is, look, let's just get rid of usernames and passwords altogether, right? And so, like, if you've logged into a Windows 10 device using the facial recognition or a thumbprint or something like that, you may not have known it, but you're actually using a FIDO-compliant protocol there. And Google is supporting it, eBay is supporting it, and a bunch of others, and soon actually even a fruit company, it sounds like, is about to agree to add support as well. So pretty soon you'll see a world where it'll be very commonplace to interact with and log into a machine using some kind of bio or a PIN and just get rid of usernames and passwords altogether. I feel like that's maybe the biggest thing we could do in the industry, both in terms of making it easy for consumers, right? And for employees, like I don't have to remember my weird username and password anymore. And also more secure by just getting rid of phishing attacks and other challenges like that. We spent a bunch of time, obviously, making sure that the service is enterprise ready as well, right? Because it underlies Office 365, you can imagine that Satya thinks it's really important that it never goes down. And in fact, our worst outage ever was last November. And a small part of Northern Europe went down for about 5 hours. And you can imagine what a firestorm we had internally at Microsoft as we tried to fix that. And that was, so we're at about 10 million tenants in the directory now. That affected less than 1 million tenants, right? But boy, if you followed the news, clearly you would have thought it was, well, you would have thought it was much worse, right? But it was bad enough, and we continue to work to make sure that that kind of thing never happens on our watch. But inherently, the design of the system is, first of all, geographically spread, right? So one of the things about our European outage, it was only in 3 data centers in Northern Europe, and thus the rest of the world was never affected. Right? But in theory, in fact, we found a bug that we fixed. In theory, even in Northern Europe, all 3 data centers were up and running. Right? When one of them went down, the other 2 should have kept going. We've fixed that issue. And all of our data centers around the world are always designed this way. So there's always triple redundancy. Our strategy point and our architecture point is we could burn down a data center and you wouldn't notice. right? And so we continue to work on this, and it's paying off. We have a huge volume. In fact, we're going to do like 1.4 billion authentications today, probably. I think it's going to be our single biggest day ever, all around the world in 28 different data centers. And if, knock on wood, we will have no downtime at all. The third thing that's really different is we felt like, look, the directory needed to come with applications. First of all, it needed to be application aware. One of the things that drives me crazy about Active Directory on-premise, you can go searching all through that thing. There's not an app there, right? It has no idea what an app is. And so in the cloud, we decided, well, we're not going to make that mistake again. So inherently in the cloud, Azure AD knows what an app is, right? And knows how to track the permissions of an app and make sure that the right people can get to it. And in fact, we have 2,700 pre-integrated SaaS apps now. And the list of ones, some of these are password vaulted, but the list, we add about 20 to 30 new federated applications every month. So if you follow the blog, you'll be able to see basically the first of every month. I always put up a blog post with, here's all the new apps that are supported that we've added this month. But this is really different too. Like this just lets you go in and start connecting to third-party apps without having to worry about, oh, where do I get the connector? And, oh, do I have to have a custom connector built or anything like that? For a huge variety of the most popular apps, this just works. And in fact, when we look at the data every month to see, okay, what apps are people using that we don't have and which of these apps are used the most, you'd be shocked at how sharp the curve is, right? There are about 120 or so SaaS apps that really get used. You could probably name all of them. And then this just giant tail that goes on forever of little onesie-twosie apps. But we don't care. We support the onesie-twosies and the giant ones. And if you have an app that you want integrated that isn't, let us know. In most cases, we're able to get an app up and integrated working with the ISV in 3 to 4 weeks. And so if you've got some cloud app that you feel like is important for your business and you don't see in the catalog, we'd be love to work with you to make sure it gets added. So how's this working? It's been a very, very successful and fast-growing proposition for us. As of last night, in fact, I pulled these just before I went to bed. That's why Jackie got the slide so late. There were 10 million organizations. Yesterday was our first day where we passed 10 million organizations in the directory. Managing 696 million users. I didn't check this morning, but if Asia and Europe had a good day yesterday, we probably are at 700 million now. We'll do 1.4 billion authentications today. But the piece I'm the happiest about is the rapid growth in third-party apps. And this is really key to our vision, right? We don't want to be the directory for Microsoft's cloud. We want to be the directory for the cloud. Right, so I watched this number very closely to see how many third-party applications are now authenticating user Azure Active Directory. And last month was the first time where we got to this number, 78,000 third-party apps. So these are ones that Microsoft had nothing to do with, and they're not in our pre-integrated list. These are just apps that someone somewhere has decided to integrate with the directory because they have a business need or because it's an ISV who sees a business opportunity. Yes?
I'm just curious, the 1.3 or 4 billion authentications, does that include the federated authentications or just the ones where Azure AD did the actual authentication?
No, this includes federated. Federated authentications are about 35% of the 1.3 billion. In fact, federated authentications are about 35%. Password synced, so you can sync a hash of your password up. That makes up another 20 or so percent. And then the rest are all just logging directly into the service.
Do you see all those trends growing? Are they trending in parallel, or are they?
As larger and larger customers come on, so we're really in a year where, in fact, I'll share this data point with you guys. So as of about a week ago, I'm sorry, the question. Oh, good. I'm being cued to repeat the question. Is that a kind of a stable trend, or is that changing? So what we are seeing is that large companies have finally decided to move. Right? So a lot of very large companies we've been talking to for a long time and have been telling us, oh, we're getting ready for identity in the cloud, or oh, we're thinking about our first Office deployment. It's happening. So today, 90% of the Fortune 5,000 have a tenant in Azure Active Directory that they're using for something. And what we can see is that as larger and larger companies come on, the use of federation goes higher and higher. All right, so federation is becoming a larger part of the total number of authentications. Password sync is becoming a larger part of the total tenants. So yeah, so that was kind of one of the messages I want to make sure people heard, is that we really clearly are at the inflection point now. Like every major company in the world has set up and is starting to run digital identities in the cloud, right? It's pretty clear. Some of them are using it just to get into Azure, so they'll have 10 admins and a couple developers. Some of them are using it for Office 365. Some of them are using it. In fact, one of the biggest apps that gets used with Azure AD now is ServiceNow. Some of our largest customers use it for hundreds of thousands of employees, provisioning out to ServiceNow so they can get service tickets to know where they're supposed to go that day. Right? So this really is clearly the year where cloud identity became a real thing, rather than well, someday in the future we'll do that. Or maybe someday I won't ever do that. There was a lot of, my first year, 4 years ago, running around telling people this story, I got a lot of, what the heck, I would never do that. So given that, what are people doing? I mean, we have enough data and enough customers now to tell you, hey, what are the main things people actually do with Azure AD? So I'm going to kind of fly through these. Most of these you probably know, but I'll just recap a few. The first thing, and in fact, this is the one that most people justify the cost. Like if you're running up a business case internally to say, hey, why would we do this, right? Password reset is an easy one to make the business case on. So Sainsbury in the UK, they have 160,000 full-time employees, and they made the whole business case here just on, we're going to get rid of help desk calls to reset passwords. And so by setting up our cloud-based password reset, and it actually does account unlock and password change and all those kinds of things too. This then writes back to their on-premise directory and has gotten them out of the business of having to pick up the phone after every holiday to take hundreds of calls from people who forgot their passwords or who they expired over the long break or whatever. And for a lot of customers, you can make the whole business case for why you would want to use Azure AD just based on the economics of this. And everything else I'm going to tell you about is free after that, essentially, from a business case standpoint. But the main thing people use it for, obviously, the slides are out of order here, I apologize. This is not improving employee mobile productivity. The main thing people use it for is actually access to apps. Right? And we've really expanded the variety of ways you can get to apps. So you can now use Azure AD to get to SaaS apps like I was talking about. You can write your own apps in that as well if you want. But we're seeing a big take up in our new application proxy. And what the application proxy lets you do is go from the cloud back to an on-premise application. Particularly, this seems to be really popular with SharePoint. Right? Like I have an on-premise SharePoint. I got somebody with an iPad in Starbucks that needs to get to it. Right? And I don't want to expose it on the internet. I don't want to go through the whole mess of setting up my DMZ, blah, blah. You can just use the app proxy to let them log in. It's nice because they have to log in and go through all of our security checks and conditional access policy before they can go back and then get to the on-premise application. And the architecture for the on-premise application is pretty cool in that there's no inbound connections ever. It's always outbound polling. So it's a really nice security story as well. Obviously, you can connect it up to Windows Server Active Directory to get to other things. And then we've got nice support now for Workday, and soon you'll see us turn on a bunch of other inbound HR systems in the cloud. This is an increasingly popular thing to do, where you can essentially put your HR system in the cloud and then have it feed into Azure AD to automate your joiner and leaver process. Our largest customers in the world now do this for their high turnover employee bases, right? Like people who come and go a lot. This is a nice, cheap way to manage the leaver joiner process, all from the cloud. In fact, I think I have a slide about that. I probably just gave my future slide away. So the simple things like you would expect. This is a customer. They're a large retailer here in the Northwest. You've gone to one of their warehouses. They have 180,000 employees, and they have a giant joiner-leaver nightmare, right? Their joiner-leaver nightmare is that about 30% of the company shows up October 15th and then leaves January 15th because that's the staff up for the holiday season, right? And the number one thing they use this for is provisioning out to ServiceNow, right? Because their employees, when they want to know what they're supposed to work on that day, log into ServiceNow, it gives them a ticket. The ticket tells them what till they're at or where in the warehouse they're supposed to go, right? And that's kind of their work management process. We provisioned about 40,000 users into and out of ServiceNow over the last holiday break for them. And now they're expanding. They're going to use Azure Active Directory as the backbone for their new handheld devices. So they've got a bunch of handheld devices they're putting into stores. And for the first time, any employee in one of their warehouses will be able to look up inventory right on the store floor without having to go back to the desk. And they're using Azure AD and our open libraries on iOS and Android to enable that. Like I was saying, HR inbound provisioning, this is another really hot set of workflows that people are enabling. So Whole Foods here in the US and Unilever in the UK are using inbound from Workday. So their HR departments now enter people into Workday. We automatically flow those identities into Azure AD, and then based on the attributes of those identities, get them into the correct groups, and then provision them out to SaaS applications. And then, lo and behold, after a lot of work, soon in the fall, we'll be able to provision back to their on-premise directory as well. But probably the thing that's the coolest, I mean, I'm just shocked at how fast this has taken off, is Azure Active Directory domain services. So this is the ability in the Azure cloud to go in and turn on legacy endpoints in Azure AD that let you bring an on-premise workload in a VM and just domain join it and have it do all the things you would expect, right? So Azure AD Domain Services gives you Kerberos, NTLM, LDAP, and group policy endpoints in Azure data centers. So you can just take a VM, get it running in Azure, tell us which VNet it's in, and all of a sudden a bunch of DCs show up that you can domain join and manage access and all the great things you would expect. I would encourage you not to use NTLM if you can avoid it, right? We'd rather leave that nightmare back on premise if we can. But we already have 3,500 customers up and using this in production, and it's not even GA yet. In fact, we're having an inventory problem where we're running out of data center space and having to go find new data center space to run this in because it's been so popular. But this is a great way to get your legacy apps available to your employees in the cloud without having to do major surgery on them and update all their protocols to support some new flow that they don't support. So that's probably the biggest thing people do with Azure AD today. So two emerging capabilities though. So collaborating with partners is another big one. If you haven't heard about it, Azure Active Directory B2B is in preview now. This is basically a way to let you use Azure AD to collaborate with all these other customers. And in fact, we have a couple customers now who are using this, and one of the first thing they did was they just went and surveyed all of their suppliers and partners and found out, 80% of them already have a tenant in Azure AD, right? So essentially all they've done is just set up the equivalent of a trust in the cloud between those tenants. And now I can invite some users from that tenant, and I can assign them to apps, and they can do work. But in addition, if your customer or partner or whoever, business partner, doesn't have a tenant, then we have a whole flow that just automates the invitation, gets them provisioned with a tenant, and they can log in and start doing work with you as well. So this is a really nice way to encourage and make B2B kind of seamless without you having to manage your partner's identities, right? Because that's kind of unfortunately, that's the nightmare we created on premise, where either you're managing your partner's identities, which gives you good visibility of those identities and what's happening with them, but you don't know when the employee left the company or if they're supposed to do that job anymore. Or if you're using federation, a token shows up and you're supposed to just trust the token and hope that your partner did the right thing. Both of those are not great answers. We think that this is a much better answer in the cloud, as it gives you kind of the benefits of both in terms of federation, where you don't manage your partner's identities, but also visibility for compliance purposes, because you can see the identities, you can attest to which set of apps they have access to, you can see when they log in and all the things that they do. So it's a really nice balance over the existing models. Kodak Alaris was the first customer to go live with this. They use it for their photo development service. So if you're a retailer in the U.S., you can upload high def images to Kodak Alaris's service. They call it Picture Park. And a few days later, giant glossy prints show up for you to deliver to the customer. They rolled this out very quickly to all of their retail partners in the U.S. using Azure AD B2B, and it's a very, very active service now as a result. You have a question, it looks like, yes?
Yeah, I just wonder if you can contrast. So you talked about the tenant-to-tenant sort of federation where your partner has a tenant. So could you differentiate getting an assertion from their IDP and hoping they did the right thing in their IDP from getting an authentication event from their tenant and hoping they did the right thing in their tenant? I mean, they seem the same to me.
So yes, they would seem the same. However, we are building in the ability for you to essentially set the requirements of what did they have to have done. So for instance, when was the last time that user was attested to? Did the user perform an MFA or not? If not, make them do an MFA now. So you'll be able to essentially set the conditional access policies for any of those users. And since we can see them in the directory in the cloud, right, we can actually tell you, oh yeah, that did happen or that didn't happen.
What about password policies?
Password policies, as of yet, we don't have, but it's on the list of things we're going to add in. The biggest one we're adding, though, is the requirement that they have to perform. You could say, oh, they have to perform an MFA. And if they don't have their own MFA system, you can use the Azure AD MFA system, and like for 1 cent, you can force them to do an MFA as they enter into your resource. The next big thing is connecting directly with consumers. Right, so if you think about, I basically think of identity in the cloud as having to do 3 things, right? I've got to empower employees, I've got to be able to connect to my business partners and customers, and then the last piece is I want to then be able, if I have consumers that I interact with, I want to be able to do that through the cloud as well. And that's what Azure Active Directory B2C is. Azure AD B2C is a little different. It's a private label service, right? Like no one knows when you interact with it, it's from Microsoft. In fact, you might have already used it and not even known it. We already have 1 billion identities that we are onboarding from companies around the world. And this is just a way to say, hey, I don't want to mess with that mess of managing identity, right? I don't want to have to worry about if I salted and hashed the passwords the right way. I don't want to worry about 99.99% uptime. I don't want to worry about all of the integrations with third-party federations. So if you want to log in with Facebook and Facebook changes something, I have to go fix it. Right? Like, so we can just take on all that nightmare for you and let you use this as a private label system to interact with customers. And it's cheap. Like if you go look at the per user fees on this, it's a tiny fraction of a cent to store a user and a tiny fraction of a cent every time a user authenticates, with a nice cap even. So if a user is very, very active, we just take all the overage for them during the month. I think it's after their 8th authentication, we just cover all the rest. So it's a really nice model to be able to do this kind of end consumer-facing service. And we do have great support for interacting, if they want to log in with Google or Facebook or their Microsoft account. I think we have LinkedIn now. We've added Yahoo. There's a couple of Chinese services that, of course, have 400 million users you've never heard of that we support. Yes?
Considering what happened last week, is having LinkedIn an option a good thing?
So considering what happened last week, is having LinkedIn an option a good thing? Maybe not, and you might want to choose to not expose it when you use this. But you can choose which set of identity providers you want to support. We just give you a catalog, and you go in and change the policy and say, well, yeah, I want to support Facebook, and hopefully you'll want to support Microsoft account, but it's totally up to you. Or you can also just use what we call local, right? So you can use local accounts, and that's just me at thissite.com, right? I just get a local account, and you'd use normal passwords and MFA and all that kind of stuff without having to hook up to an identity provider. Real Madrid was the first customer to use this. They've onboarded, we're getting close to 10 million consumers now out of their 450 million fans. If you've used the Real Madrid app in the iOS store, the Android store, or weird enough in the right, it just looks like their application. In fact, the first 2 weeks it was up, it was the #1 app in the iOS store. Okay, so now we've talked about kind of the business benefits of connecting to employees and letting them get to apps and connecting to partners and connecting to consumers. But there's another whole category here of this, which is that enabling that modern work style, which I think is really important. And this is a really cool feature of Windows 10, which is the ability to natively join your Windows 10 device to Azure AD. Right? And it's super simple. Right? I get a Windows 10 Enterprise or Pro device. I give it my Azure AD credentials, and then the rest is taken care of. There's no like domain join. There's no like join it with my, enroll it with my MDM. That's all just automated. And then I get all kinds of cool things. I get like roaming settings, right? So all of my network passwords that I use at work, or the app set that I have, and my background, and all those things. Anytime I go and log into an Azure AD joined machine using my work credentials, oh, hey, they're there. Awesome. Obviously you get SSO to all of the applications that we support, but this is really like native SSO in that there's no difference between the cloud and on-premise. I log into the device and I can get everywhere, right? I don't have to log in again in the cloud. Like I was saying, it automatically enrolls into the MDM solution. So obviously we love Intune, but that one's really cool. But it will work with AirWatch and Mobile Iron as well. So it gets rid of the whole extra step of having to enroll a device, which in most cases is a nasty, nightmarish thing anyway. And if you happen to be, well, actually, I'll come back to that. If you happen to be a customer who likes domain join on-premise, though, you can also automatically, as a group policy setting, to automatically have your domain join machines Azure AD join as well, right? So all of the benefits of Azure AD are, you could think of that as like the superset of domain joins. Everyone at Microsoft runs in this hybrid mode now, where you domain join your machine, it gets automatically Azure AD joined, and we're managing about 250,000 devices at Microsoft now doing this. The nice thing about it is it gets rid of all of the mess of like imaging the device, right? Like I don't have to worry about managing images and stuff like that. It just logs in and it pulls its state down from the cloud, right? Whatever the configuration I want is, the apps on it, all those things just show up. So it gets rid of a big, big cost center in a lot of companies. SkyWest was the first customer to deploy this broadly. They have 7,500. This is a small airline here in the United States. If you've flown Delta, like Delta Regional, if you've taken a Delta Regional flight, it's actually these guys who fly it. They have 7,500 pilots, and I don't know if any of you have ever looked in the pilots, in the cockpit. Traditionally they've carried these giant briefcases, right? With 20 to 30 pounds of documentation in it, and those are all of the safety procedures and the manuals and flight plans and all that kind of stuff. Now every SkyWest pilot has a Surface Pro 3 running Windows 10, and it's Azure AD joined. Right? Because this is like the ultimate mobile workforce. Pilots are never on the corporate network, right? But all they have to do is every time the machine hits the internet, the MDM system can check, can download. In fact, there's a really cool app here. It updates the app. The app has all of the materials that they usually would have to carry. So that 30-pound bag has become a 1.5-pound Surface Pro now. So it's pretty compelling. And I think if you think about those of you who have highly mobile workforces who are rarely on your corporate network, this is a great option, right? To be able to let them be highly productive, get to all the things they need to, but in a way that gives you good compliance and visibility. So with all that, like cool business benefits, right? Then you have to ask yourself, okay, the last thing most people are worried about is, but what about security in the cloud? Right? Isn't that dangerous? Aren't there more LinkedIn passwords out there? And we spend a ton of time on this. Now, Azure multi-factor authentication, I'm not going to talk about a great deal. If you don't have multi-factor authentication, so who doesn't have some kind of multi-factor authentication turned on? Okay. Please go home and turn on Azure multi-factor authentication. Please, please, please. It's the simplest and easiest way to change your security posture in a huge hurry. So let me just tell you a story. Here's a scary story for you. Every day, between the Microsoft account system and the Azure AD system, we see about 10 million attempts to take over an account. Right? This is just a hacker who's got a tool trying to take over an account. And we're no different than your system, right? Everybody's system is like this. Of those 10 million attempts, 8 million of them have the correct username and password. right? Your password is not a useful security measure anymore, right? In fact, on every login, we evaluate 120 different contextual elements. The password is one of the least revealing contextual elements that we look at, right? Your location, where you log in from, your device signature, the kinds of apps you get to, those are all where other people like you log in, those are all very useful signal. Your password is almost a useless signal, right? So if you don't have a multi-factor authentication system, we would love to help you get this one up and running. Like Infosys is one of our largest customers for Azure multi-factor authentication. They got it up and running for 140,000 employees in 1 week. Right? And we do this all the time. Like usually, unfortunately, after someone gets attacked, we get a call Friday, they're here Monday, we have them protected Friday. But if you don't have an MFA solution, the simplest thing in the world you can do is turn it on and get going in a hurry. But in addition, aside from just protecting, the login, we also think we need to do a lot more things. And this is kind of weird, this mentality of assume breach. We're going to make the system as hard to penetrate as possible. We are always working to make sure that bad guys can't get in, and we always assume that they can. Right? And so we also do layers of protection and monitoring to make sure that even if they get in, one, we can tell you about it, and two, we can mitigate it. So this is one of the best mitigations you could do, which is to use Azure AD cloud-based privileged identity management to take anybody who's an administrator in Azure AD and make them a temporary administrator. Microsoft uses this today. We went from having over 120 global administrators down to 10. All the other ones have been put into temporary roles, right? And then they have to go in and request elevation, and someone has to approve it before they can go do something, and then they are automatically removed from that role. This is nice because it means that even if someone could get into that account, they can't go muck around with the global admin stuff until someone else approves it. Right, so it's a pretty nice thing, and it's just part of Azure Active Directory Premium. So here's another one I would say, if you can't, this is easy to turn on. Like if you're using Azure AD Premium, you could have this protection for your company in a day or two. Right? It is not a hard thing to do. I think yesterday you guys, there was a session on conditional access control, right? Who was there? Is that? Yes. Okay, so this is, if you learned about anything in this session, this is the magic under the covers you really want to learn about. So conditional access control is the thing we think makes that idea of the cloud as the control plane a reality. All right, so our conditional access system under Azure AD lets you take a whole bunch of different contextual data, things like what's the user, what are their attributes, what kind of authentication did they perform, what groups are they in, is this device known to my organization? Is it managed by my MDM? Is it compliant? How sensitive is this app? Are they coming from inside the network, outside the network? What's their risk score? And I'll tell you about risk scores in just a second. And you'll see a growing set of these over the next 6 months. But it lets you set on a per application basis policy for who can do what. Right? And this is kind of what, like if I was going to tell you what's the secret sauce of Azure AD, this is it. And you can go play with it now, and there'll be a lot more things. In fact, I'm going to show you in the roadmap. Over the next 90 days, you're going to see a lot of things turn on I think are pretty exciting here. The most exciting of these, though, is Azure Active Directory Identity Protection. And this is another one of those. If you're using Azure AD, please just turn it on. Every single customer who turns it on finds scary things they need to go deal with right away. Right? And it will help you both find those and deal with them, and it'll also help protect you from future ones. So what is this? This is a service that watches every login to Azure Active Directory, either in the cloud, or in fact, just yesterday we turned on support for federation as well. So every federated login. And it does two things. First is that on the login, it creates a risk score. So our machine learning system looks at every single login and all of these 120 data points, and creates a risk score for that specific login. And in addition, it creates an accumulated risk score for each individual. So even over time, if my specific login wasn't risky, if I do lots of slightly risky logins or lots of slightly risky things, then my risk score gets pushed up and eventually you can catch me. Right? That's how the system works. It does all of this in about 100 milliseconds. And then based on conditional, and then you can set up conditional access policies to take advantage of that risk score. All right, so if someone comes in and they have a high risk score, let's block them. If someone comes in with a medium risk score, let's make them do an MFA. And if they come in with a low risk score, well, you can probably just let them in. And the algorithms here are really, really cool. So let me just tell you about one. So one of our algorithms, and the one that's probably in fact the most effective, what it does is it creates clusters of like users across tenants. Okay, so for instance, me, some of the guys who work for me, some of the folks who work at Nintendo, right? We all log in from a similar cluster of IP addresses all the time, right? So because we're all using the same backbone in the same location, we probably all have Comcast as our home cable network because that's what's available here, right? And we all use AT&T as our phone service because you know what? That's what's available here, and they've got the best signal. So in our algorithm, in our system, the machine learning system is using algorithms and creates a cluster of people who look like me, right? And I have a few guys on my team who also go to New York all the time, like they're logging in from the Microsoft office in New York City quite frequently because they have customers they're responsible for there, right? So now when I fly to New York and log in, my risk score is relatively moderate because other people in my cluster log in from New York a lot, right? Even though I don't. But if I were to log in from Tokyo and no one in my cluster logs in from Tokyo, that drives my risk score much, much higher, right? And maybe I'll have to do an MFA at that time. If I logged in from Tokyo on a device no one has ever seen before from a suspect IP address, then my risk would go super high and I wouldn't be able to log in, right? And so that's kind of how the system works. That algorithm gives us about 89 to 90% accuracy on being able to differentiate between a good login and a bad login. And we always bias toward blocking a few more good ones, right? So what happens is if we block 10 logins, 9 of them will be, or if we challenge 10 logins, 9 of them will be bad and 1 of them will be good and the person can complete the MFA and get in. Yes? Yes, it is. It doesn't yet, but we're in the process of turning it on for B2C directories. Yes. Oh, repeat the question. The question was, will it work for B2C directories? I keep forgetting I'm on video. Will it work for B2C directories? It does not today. We are in the process of wiring it up so you'll get the same benefit for B2C. Yes?
So in the context of conditional access, I noticed that one of those, in the last slide, one of those was shorter than the rest, right? So the business sensitivity was really short list.
Yeah.
So I guess I'd like to understand where on the roadmap we can expect to have options at the resource level, at the application level, to either specify a risk tolerance, so that might vary from application to application, and how those options would then extend beyond your workloads like SharePoint and to other cloud things. So we can just manage that risk tolerance at the application level.
Yeah. So what you'll see in August, and I'll show you in the roadmap, which is coming up in a few slides, is that you'll be able to, any application you are managing with Azure AD, you'll be able to tag its risk level, right? And then you will be able to assign access policies based on risk level rather than app per app, if that's what you want to do.
And good. And at the resource, I mean, so at the site collection and document library level?
No, so all we can control is at the relying party, right? So for us, like, it'll be SharePoint is a app, right? So it's the first level of defense. You'll rapidly see, though, we're working with the SharePoint team already, right? So you'll rapidly see, rapidly meaning it'll probably take a year, right? But you'll rapidly see, then the SharePoint team will then start taking the token, looking at the risk on it, and letting you then control at a much more granular level what set of libraries, for instance, and then even beyond that, what set of actions in a library. Okay. We talked about this. This is up and running today. It's in preview. So if you're an Azure AD Premium customer, you can just go turn it on. Please do. Like, it's after MFA, this is the next easiest thing you could do, and in terms of security benefit, it is just sky high. Question?
So what's the user experience if your risk score is too high, right? So let's say we say every user MFAs.
Yeah.
So it's not like we're going to, ask them to MFA if they're at a medium or a high risk, but we're just simply going to deny them and ask them to try again. What's the user experience there?
Yeah, so the question is, what's the user experience based on the different risk levels, right? So if I log in and I'm at a risk level that you're requiring an MFA on, then it's just the standard MFA experience. If it is at a very high level, then it's a block, right? And the screen comes up, and it's essentially text that you can specify. But essentially says, hey, given the following things, your admin has denied you access to this, right? Please contact blah, blah, blah. Yeah. The piece I didn't talk about in here, so two other things I want to make sure to mention. Probably the coolest single thing about the whole system, though, is not only are we monitoring and blocking and mitigating all these things for you, we're also recommending improvements in your policy. So, for instance, if we detect a user who over time has become more risky, right, the machine will then recommend for you a change to your access policies that would prevent that kind of thing from happening in the future, right? So that's a nice case as well. And in all of these, what happens is that it's hard to see on the screen here, but this little circle graph in the corner here is whenever you go in and think about changing a policy, we look back at your previous 30 days worth of data and tell you how many users would be impacted by that change, right? So you can almost like pre-pilot and say, oh, if I made this change, what'll happen? And might get some number that would scare your pants off, and you're like, well, that would be a bad policy change. Let me figure out what I want to do instead. There is can you put it in monitor mode? There is no monitor mode, but you can always do this. So we feel like this is a good approximation for monitor mode because we're looking at your actual login traffic, right, for the last 30 days. In fact, you can specify the time frame.
Not the first time turning it on, or if we turn it on, people start getting blocked.
The question is the first time you turn it on. So if you've had users logging into Azure AD at all, we will always look at their trailing number. So far, we have no customer who has not had data to look at. I haven't thought about the case of the first time. Yeah.
We've been on Office 365 for over 3 years.
Okay, yeah. So in your case.
And we were told easy access, just log in, no MFA. But now we're turning the other. Now I have to change a whole population of 3 years of no MFA, just log on and go.
Right.
So I have this, if I turn this on, I have a lot of explaining to do. So
understood. So the question is, hey, in the real world, there are people, right? What do we do about those people, right? So here's what will happen. You will go in and you can model some policy. And it will show you how many people would be impacted by it, right? And in fact, you can see the exact people who would be impacted by it, in fact. And what you will see is that a shockingly small number of will ever get prompted for an MFA or blocked, right? Like if you've got thousands of employees logging in, you'll probably see in the range of 10 or so who will actually be impacted by it. It's a very, very small number because the machine algorithms are really good at not giving you false positives, right? And then in addition, there's a whole prompting system because if for instance, if your users aren't set up for MFA, right, the first thing is a prompting system that then walks them through the process of getting MFA set up, right? And then when they show up and if at some future point they actually have a risk score that's high or medium or whatever, then they would get prompted to complete the MFA. Yes?
I can kind of picture how this looks from a web login perspective.
Yes.
I'm having a hard time picturing it for an active sync kind of scenario for users that haven't already set up MFA or we haven't had it turned on in the past, that kind of thing.
So the question is, what about like rich clients, right? So you'll find that in all of the new Office rich clients that we've gone to using the OAuth model like I was talking about before, and the screen just comes up and looks just like it's in front of the app, but it is just a small browser window, right, that lets them complete the OAuth flow. And the OAuth flow, if needed, will do the prompting to get them to set up their MFA first in that same window. Right, so it's pretty straightforward. Anybody else? Okay.
Oh,
Yes.
I just checked in my portal. It's not turned on for Federated yet. Is that just slow rollout?
No, we turned it on Monday, so we need to figure out why you wouldn't see. Okay, the question is. I hate this. The question is, why can't I see it in my portal? Are you looking at the new portal or the old one? The new portal, and you don't see anything for Federated.
No, I just clicked on enable policy, and it
Yep.
said not enabled for Federated domains.
Yoram, do you have any idea? Okay, we'll follow up with you. In fact, Alex Weinhardt is speaking later today. Is he or is he tomorrow? When's Hugh? Do you know when is Alex? Tomorrow. So if you haven't heard an answer back from us, gang up on Alex, and he'll give you the answer. I have a blog post ready to go that says it's available, so hopefully it is. The cool thing here is that we're really the only service in the world that can do this because we run a whole bunch of consumer and business systems, right? So we run the Microsoft account system and the Azure AD system, plus Hotmail, plus Xbox, plus Office 365, right? So we have this giant set of data to train our algorithms with. And it really means that we have kind of a unique capability here where, as a community of Microsoft customers, you get the benefit of everybody's information rather than just your own local information. And we end up processing well more than 10 terabytes of data each day through the machine learning system, all in little 100 millisecond chunks. So those are kind of the 6 main things you probably might want to think about using Azure Active Directory for. Toward a world with nodes of compute and tons of devices and lots of employees and customers and partners who expect to be able to do digital business with you, right? Are the investments you're making now setting you up for that future? Because if you're cleaning up yesterday's mess, it's probably not helping, right? In fact, in a lot of cases, you should just try to contain yesterday's mess and see if you can't get ready for this world of the future. Because in 10 years, if your company can't do that, you won't have a company. Or your enterprise can't do that, you won't have an enterprise. If you can get on the boat now, if you get on the train now, though, you have a great shot at it. You're still early. But this is definitely the year where the world is flipping. Like every major company in the world is moving to the cloud for digital identity this year. We would love to help you with that. Of course, OCG would love to help you with that as well. I always say there's no partner in the world who we work with more closely than these guys. So if they can't answer your question, they know us and they know how to get us to answer your questions. And they know how to get to production team and get our people on site to help you out when needed. If there's anything we can do to help you get ready for this world of the future, please let us and OCG know. And I always end with my tagline. So that's the future. I hope we can help you on your journey to it. Thank you.